Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time of day it is, I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is that Time Poe-inspired Christmas. Okay. All right, so I'm not sure exactly how big an inspiration Edgar Allan Poe was actually into Christmas, but I do like to believe that he had a hidden hand. Right? He had a hidden hand in maybe the most important Christmas story of the modern era. But there is one thing that we know, and it's that the Christmas holiday as we know it today is heavily influenced by this story. A Christmas Carol. You know, that old morality play about the guilty conscience, right? The story of Ebenezer Scrooge and his ghostly visitation that turned that foul man sweet. But it's the traditions that are expressed in this story, you know, the big family gatherings and big Christmas dinners, and more importantly, even the spirit of Christmas itself, you know, the spirit of goodwill and generosity. They really start to take hold in the collective subconscious of the English-speaking world and beyond, right? And it's not alone. There are other Christmas stories of this era that, you know, really kind of start to do the same thing. And one of its main things, of course, is to take the Christ out of Christmas, right? I mean, that's really what we're seeing happening here, right? Because the thing about A Christmas Carol is its ubiquity. I mean, every holiday season since its publication, it has been here, right? And this thing was published in 1843. It was written by Charles Dickens here, right? And here's a cover of the first edition of it, right? Right? And it is rolled out every holiday season since then, right? Either through reprints or dramatic readings and stage productions to radio, TV, and film. You know, it was inescapable. And so the thing about The Christmas Carol, as I said, it was published in 1843 and it came out that holiday season and was an instant success, right? Sold out. Right? Biggest book ever. And right, so it was written in the latter part of 1842 and in the early part of 1843. And what a lot of people really might not know is that it was written hot on the heels of Charles Dickens here coming back to England from a very long, you know, tour of America. You know, he certainly did the East Coast in 1842, hot on the heels of his new book, which was called Barnaby Rudge. And I should have brought Barnaby Rudge brought up. And so he's coming over to do readings and lectures, and he's trying to court American publishers. He wants to cut a good American publication deal. And he also wants to talk about copyright laws, because this is a real concern of the time. You know, a lot of writers were upset because the copyright laws really favored the publishers of that era, right? And Poe is one to believe this as well. And so in early March 1842, Charles Dickens is staying in Philadelphia, where he has a series of visits with this man. They meet over the course of, I don't know if it was twice in the same day. It's kind of hard for me to tell with the articles that I found about their meeting. But they definitely met twice and for several hours. And so these two titans of literature, and here they are, artist representations of what they would have looked like in 1842, Poe on the left and Dickens on the right. Yeah. And for a hot minute there, the two of them form like a mutual appreciation society. All right, and so now in 1842, what the narrative scripts up for us is a tale of two different writers, right? We have Edgar Allan Poe, you know, who's the slightly older of the two by about 3 years, right? You know, he's to become the patron saint of the starving artist, you know, the tortured genius who was slave to his art and was determined to live and die by it, right? He was going to be the first man to support himself and his family on his writing alone, right? And then we have the golden boy, Charles Dickens, right, who strikes gold with the first swing of his hammer, right? And it turns into a vein that makes him the most successful writer of his era, right? So much so that it's remembered that he was the most famous man in England. But he wasn't the richest, of course, because we talked about, you know, the copyright thing a little bit. I mean, he was by no means poor, but he was the most famous guy. Like, when he went out in the streets, everybody went running, "Hey, Charlie!" He's like the Beatles and the Stones combined, right? All right, so now in 1842, Poe is living in Philadelphia, right? He's been there a few years, and he's working for Graham's Magazine. All right, and when he's hired by Graham's Magazine, it has a circulation of about 6,000. And after a year and a half of being under his stewardship, right, he increases the circulation by like sixfold. It goes up to like 40,000, right? Making it one of the most popular magazines in Philadelphia, if not in that mid-Atlantic East Coast region, right? I mean, it was a really successful magazine, right? And, and the people who read magazines, followed the ideas that were in those magazines. Right? All right, and Poe is at his creative peak. I mean, most of his best stories, or his most famous stories, were written while he was at this time in Philadelphia, right? But the narrative has it that it's so bad for him. So it says his family moved to Philadelphia in the summer of 1838. Conditions were so bad that they were living on a diet of bread and molasses. I was like, bread and molasses? That puts a whole new definition on shit in a brick. And so now to further set the stage a little bit, by 1841, Poe has published Murders in the Rue Morgue, like the first detective story, right? And he's had a 2-volume anthology of his early work published. But again, as we saw, it's not really doing much for him financially, living on bread and molasses. All right, so, by this point, he's been well published. And now on the other side of it, we have the Golden Boy over here, right? So just a little bit of background on Golden Boy, right? He comes from, like, he's a rags to riches tale, right? His father ends up in debtor's prison, and he and his family have to live in debtor's prison together, which I think is kind of an interesting concept, right? But they end up getting bailed out, and he has very little education, but he's extremely bright. He's so bright that he's so bright that even uneducated, he works his way among erudite circles, right? And he eventually gets a job for a newspaper covering the parliamentary beat. And it's being a political journalist that he cuts his writing teeth. And it isn't until the mid-1830s that he publishes his first book, which is the Pickwick Papers, which is a huge success for him. I mean, he is super successful out of the gate. I mean, his next 2 books were Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby, right? I mean, it's just hard to get bigger than Charles Dickens, right? And that's, a really important part of the story, right? And so now it's 1842 and Dickens is coming over and he's promoting his newest novel, which is this Barnaby Rudge, which happens to be a mystery, right? But the thing about Dickens and his success and the way some of these stories, especially like Dickens' style, and like Alexander Dumas, I think, also did this. I could have just made that up. But, these things were serialized. You'd get a chapter a month, and, the magazine editor was hoping that you would keep coming back so you would get the full story, and then a book would be published at the end of it, right? And so he had been publishing this Barnaby Rudge story, right, and was coming over here to promote it. And Edgar Allan Poe, as editor of Graham Magazine, had been reviewing Barnaby Rudge. And he was ecstatic when he found out that Dickens was coming, right? I mean, I believe he really felt he was going to make like this super connection with Dickens. Dickens was going to understand him and see his pure genius and, help get him broke. He was going to help break Edgar Allan Poe, Dickens was, right? I think that was Poe's dream of it, right? And when he heard that Dickens was coming, he wrote Dickens and he forwarded to him his anthology, which is called The Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque, I think, right? And copies of Graham's magazines with his review, because he claims to have solved Dickens' mystery after 4 chapters, right? And an interesting side note is that when Dickens read this, and when he read Poe's idea, he said that Poe must be possessed by the devil to have figured it out so soon, because he figured it out. And that's really interesting when you consider this. Dickens, whose own name means devil. Right? And so the story goes that upon receiving the books from Poe and the letters and the invitation to meet, he becomes very excited by the idea as well. And he arranges with Poe to meet in Philadelphia. All right, so anyway, so Charlie is really impressed with Eddie, right? And, he agrees to meet with Edgar Allan Poe in Philadelphia. And so on March 6th, 1842, just do the numerology on that date, right? They meet at the United States Hotel in Philadelphia here. And this is a 1950 engraving of it from real life, it says down in here in the corner somewhere, right? From real life, this engraving. And so for several hours they met and they talked and they read poetry to each other and they talked about the publishing industry and the copyright laws. And so Eddie appeals to Charlie and he says, please help me find publishing in England. And of course Dickens agrees, a genius like yours needs to be published in England. I will do everything I can with my many literary connections, and I will help you get published, Eddie, right? Because you're good. This is the story that the mainstream narrative has out about this meeting, right? I mean, this is really the way it plays. But one really amazing aspect about this meeting is that, and I failed to mention earlier that in Barnaby Rudge, one of the characters is a talking raven, right? And it turns out that raven character was based on Dickens's own pet raven named Grip. And he brought Grip with him on this American tour. And during their meeting, it said that Edgar Allan Poe was so transfixed by the raven and its behaviors and its vocabulary, and that, he was absolutely 100% influenced by this experience and by the character of Grip in the story of Barnaby Rudge. There are many articles out there that will put that out there, that it's this meeting and that character of Grip that inspires Edgar Allan Poe to write The Raven. And so even more amazing that this meeting with a live raven inspiring Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven is that Dickens loved this bird so much that when he died, he taxidermied it, right? And it's in Philadelphia today. There it is. That's Grip. So that's the raven that's so ever gently tapping at my chamber door. There it is. And so now this is a point for me now where the story starts to get a little more interesting. When I start to think about how every one of these articles, and I read a few, not just the two that I have brought up here. All right, here's one I have brought up about him meeting the bird, right? I brought up a bunch of them. This was just happened to be the best one. They all talk about the influence that Dickens had on Poe, how influential Dickens's writing was on Poe. Like this thing with the raven in Barnaby Rudge, right? I mean, but I don't think there's been enough attention paid to the idea that Edgar Allan Poe may have heavily influenced Charles Dickens, okay? And we're going to just take a quick look at their bibliographies and see if I can't make a case here, right? And so, Dickens, as I was saying, he started his career as a political journalist, right? And his first novel, The Pickwick Papers, isn't published until 1836. Interesting year, right? What The Pickwick Papers is, it's essentially a collection of his political writings, but with some short fiction in there, and there is an element of like the grotesque and arabesque in there, right? And then we can see, he just sort of takes off, right? I mean, look right out of the gate is next two, right? All right, and it's from here he immediately becomes the most successful novelist, of the Victorian era. I mean, no doubt about it, right? But one thing about Charles Dickens we need to keep in mind is that he is a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts. And so as a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, it has been deemed that you have made outstanding achievements to social progress and development. All right? It's Arts Award for Social Progress and Development. All right? We're going to look at some of the people here real quick who are previous fellows, right? Not only Dickens, but Stephen Hawking, right? Karl Marx, and Benjamin Franklin. From where? Benjamin Franklin's from Philadelphia, right? And we do know that he spent a little time over in England, right? Eating children. Hey, that's what Benji was doing over there. Right? All right, so it's founded in 1754 by this William Shipley. All right, and it's granted a royal charter in 1847. So it's separate from that other Royal Society that Charles II set up, with the arts and sciences. This is a different Royal Society for the Arts, right? One that encourages manufacture and commerce as well. All right, so now the thing about, with Franklin coming from Philadelphia and him being such an important member of the Royal Society of the Arts in their manufacture and commerce, right, that they name one of their major medals after him. And so now if Dickens is a fellow of this society, and that's the one thing I do not know as to when Dickens became a member of the Royal Society of Arts, but even if he wasn't a member, that doesn't mean he wasn't connected to and could have been a part of without being, a made man. All right, and so now if that's the case, and Benjamin Franklin coming from Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin and his people and his influence in this Royal Society would have been bringing in the best of the American newspapers. But I have to believe that Franklin would have been bringing this stuff over, and so that it would have continued to come over, and that, when we see where Edgar Allan Poe was publishing his stories out of, right, he starts publishing his short stories a good 4 years or more before Dickens is published, right, and it's out of Philadelphia. I mean, look at these stories that he's publishing out of Philadelphia, and then out of Baltimore. And it's interesting also that I don't have this brought up, but Dickens submitted his first short story for publication in 1833, and 1833 was the year that, Poe won his first big money for being published with this award out of Baltimore. And so a lot of this early stuff is being published out of Philadelphia. And the thing about A Christmas Carol is, A Christmas Carol really does have what they consider like the grotesque and arabesque elements in it, right? It is a ghost story, right? I mean, there's no other way to look at that story, right? And, when we see what these royal societies are really trying to achieve, and we see who these members are, because when you look ahead to what the Royal Society of the Arts really is, right? Look at this. It says, this article is about the social change organization. The Royal Society of the Arts is about social change, using arts, manufacture, and commerce for social change. Now, the thing about this for me is, at what point do we decide that art, because it's like here with these societies that we see that art is becoming an instrument of social change, and when art becomes an instrument of social change, that's propaganda. That's the good old-fashioned psychological warfare that Paul Linebarger talked about. That's what it is, right? And this Royal Society here is really amazing. Not only some of those fellows that we talked about earlier, but some of these others as well were, and again, looking at these names here, some of the ones we talked about, but also Nelson Mandela. Think about Nelson Mandela and social change, right? David Attenborough, he's an interesting name, filmmaker. But is it this guy? The inventor of the World Wide Web is a fellow of this Royal Society. Right? But the thing about this Royal Society that really sets it above and really screams agendizing to me, right, is in its leadership. And so I just want to look at the presidents real quick. Third on the list, we have Charles Howard, the 11th Duke of Norfolk, and the Howard name becoming ever more important in the Mud City paradigm puzzle tree. Right? And working our way up, we get future kings. We get a Duke of Sussex, because of course we get a Duke of Sussex. Right? We get a Prince Consort, husband to the Queen. We get a future king here, and another future king here, right? And we get a future queen here, right? And then her husband, right? And then her daughter. They've been running the Royal Society here. Think about it. I mean, this family has been controlling the Royal Society of the Arts going back to the early 1900s and earlier. It's really unbelievable. Right? Especially when, you think about using art as tools for social change. And what did Dickens' stories do better than anybody's at the time? Because think about, what Dickens' stories are best remembered for. The portrait that they paint of that early Victorian era London, right? You cannot think of that without thinking about Charles Dickens. Right? He is one of those figures most responsible for creating that ideal in the historical landscape and in the fictional landscape. I mean, without him, would we know how dreary London was in the 1850s and 60s? I don't know. And so, winding it up, I think it is very possible that Dickens had exposure to Edgar Allan Poe's works the whole time, and through the Royal Society, especially through its connections to Philadelphia, and I think it's quite possible that Dickens was very influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, and that he knew all about Poe going into that meeting and only humored Poe, And so I believe that Edgar Allan Poe was so influential on Charles Dickens that Dickens actually gives a clue to this himself. 19 years after Poe's death, Dickens visited Poe's impoverished mother-in-law, Mrs. Maria Clem, when he returned to America in 1868, and he gave her a substantial amount of money at the end of the visit. Why would you do that? Unless you felt greatly indebted. At least kind of playing this one as above the board as I can, because there's, a huge part of me that also believes that both of these men were just, fronts. They were beards. And they were handed all their material, and they were pawns. And, and then on the other hand, with Edgar Allan Poe and his hidden hand connections, that, he's orchestrating a lot of, the way that fiction is going to be developed going forward from through his position as magazine editor. And that they're working in connection. They're all working towards the same goal. And they just creating this mythology around these two gentlemen, or perhaps even creating these two characters all together, and they just prop up a couple drunks, make sure they stay alive for several years, right? So they get some photos of them, right? Because who's to say? That's the way I have to look at it. If it's all wrong, it's all wrong. And so while doing my due diligence with Dickens, because who knows when I'll ever get to him again, and so I was talking about early on his rags to riches success story, right? That he kind of grew up in a debtor's prison and had very little education. But what little education he did get, right? And this is the thing, because he goes from no education to being, bang, one of the greatest writers. He joins literary societies and acting societies, and he really, for an uneducated dude from a poor background, he worms his way right in there. Somehow he was just that lucky. But where he did go to school, right, so he was afforded a few years of private education, a school run by this William Giles, a dissenter in Chatham. And so I found this article about the Giles family, and they were a Baptist preaching family, right? Generations of preachers who helped build up churches in small towns and then would move on and help do the same in another small town, right? But the thing about them is that they're from Devon, right? Where the Poes are from as well. So now tying Dickens to Devon and the Poes that way. And another element of where I think it's possible, because again, I think the Poe family being this hidden royal family, that the Poes that Edgar Allan Poe could have had a much more significant influence on Dickens, and they throw shade on that idea by, overblowing the influence that Dickens may have had on Poe, because surely there was some. No doubt about it. And so, but not only are they from Devon, George of Totnes had a son, John, who settled at Tavistock in Devon. And now this is the second time Tavistock is coming up in this. And again, the connections with the Tavistock Institute in London, and that's connections to, which one was it? Was it Riley or was it Drake? It was one of those guys, right? Had connections to Tavistock. And so the school which Charles Dickens attends, however briefly, right, was founded by his teacher, William Giles, who was a descendant of these Devon and Tavistock Gileses, right? And here they call it the William Giles School. And so this new school was on Clover Lane in Chatham, right? And just to show its location real quick, here it is. They have a picture of Dickens there. But look, it's so close to this bend in the river, right? We know how important all of that is. But while reading through the history of the Giles family and their movements, when they get to Chatham, they help enlarge the Baptist community there and help build a church. And that church is located on Clover Lane. And so that makes me think the school was actually a part of the church, right? And the Giles family helps build these churches up, first in 1793 and then in 1815, but it wasn't large enough. And so they build a completely new chapel on Clover Lane, all right? And they call that chapel Zion. Zion was opened in 1821 on the old site. And so just chew on that for a minute. Zion was opened in 1821. And Zion was the school that Charles Dickens went to. Thinking about this now and seeing how far back this could go in the history and the way they can monkey around with the narrative. With all the fun that they get to have with the lie, because these stories are just really amazing. All right. So I'm going to wrap this one up here. This one's been a whole lot of fun. I hope it kind of makes sense, my theory about how Poe may have influenced Charles Dickens, and so how maybe without Edgar Allan Poe, there would be no Christmas Carol, and without a Christmas Carol, there may be no Christmas today, or Christmas wouldn't be as we know it today. So, anyway, all right, guys. I hope everyone has a great holiday, and so we'll see you in 2021 at the latest. Right, so remember, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies. Right, so until the next one, cheers, guys.